This week sees the release of the third issues of X-Force, New Mutants, and Fallen Angels, and there's some exciting developments in all three of these issues, something to recommend in each of them. So let's start spoiling. Spoilers ahead. You've been warned. So, the first one I'm going to talk about today is New Mutants number 3, and some people might be disappointed from the credits because Jonathan Hickman is no longer writing this title. He probably will come back in future issues, but right now it's purely written by Ed Brisson, rhymes with kissin', and art by Flaviano. So we're changing plot lines midstream here. You know, the first two issues of New Mutants saw the New Mutants up in space trying to find their old buddy Cannonball, but now we're back on Krakoa, and some of the remaining younger mutants there are trying to find their old friends. So this is actually kind of a funny sort of parallel plot, but you know, if you picked up issue 2 and you're like, oh, you want to see what happens in the next issue with Roberto and Sam and Magic and all those characters, you're plumb out of luck. I mean, those guys aren't going to be back for probably another 2 or 3 issues. I'm not sure exactly when, but these issues 3 and 4, because 4 is coming out next week, should still be pretty fun. So again, the parallel plot on Krakoa, if you remember Bob Herman, never one of my favorite characters until today. I really like the approach to Glob that's been taken by Brisson and artist Flaviano. Again, like, if you know like the visual of Glob, it's kind of it's like a big pink glob, and you can see the skeleton of the character walking around inside, which can be, you know, kind of gross, not necessarily gory, but kind of gross to just see this walking around skeleton with the eyes coming out of the skull, and it's all, you know, covered in this mucus sort of membrane. But the way Flaviano draws Glob, and the way that Brisson, you know, writes the character, he's appealing. I really like the character in this issue, and it's kind of funny. He's clearly got a crush on Pixie. You know, will anything come of that? He's asking Armor in one scene, like, do you think Pixie could ever go for a guy like me? And she's like, just ask her. He's like, forget I said anything. But, you know, it's teenage melodrama, so that's consistent anyway. Even though the characters have changed, the melodrama stays the same. So what are Glob and Armor up to on Krakoa? Well, same as the New Mutants in earlier issues, they are missing some of their friends. They're asking, where are the people that we hung out with in Grant Morrison's new X-Men run way back in the day? So they're looking for Beak and Angel. And you probably remember the visual of Beak. You probably remember Angel, again, with the wings. Even if you didn't read a lot of X-Men comics back in the day, I bet you know Angel from the First Class movies. Zoe Kravitz played her in that film. But, you know, in the comics, she and Beak got married. Turns out they moved to a farm in Nebraska with all their kids and their parents. And so Armor and Glob go after them, try to find the farm and try to convince them, I think, to move to Krakoa. But it turns out once they get there, you know, bad things start happening. They're bringing trouble with them. They find the farm. They have a lovely reunion. But then, unfortunately, it seems like they led some problems to this farm's door. So that is the cliffhanger for this book. Some of the other interesting stuff in this issue, New Mutants, and part of why I like it so much is the appearance of Boom Boom. Although, if you remember, for a time, like back in the early 90s in X-Force, they changed her code name from Boom Boom to Boomer. They switched it back later, but I feel like they're missing out on a great running gag here by sticking with Boom Boom instead of Boomer. You know, there's a lot of opportunities for okay Boomer reactions to everything she does, but, you know, that ship has sailed, that horse has left the stable. But still, it's fun to have an appearance by her in here. It's strange. It's like I mentioned this in my last set of reviews about how it seems like it would be more appropriate for Catherine Pryde to not be in Marauders, for her to be in Excalibur, and for Gambit to not be in Excalibur, for him to be in the Marauders. And I'm feeling the same way this week with Boom Boom. It's vaguely appropriate. She shows up in New Mutants. She was a character in that. But it might have been more appropriate for her to be in X-Force, and maybe even more appropriate than that for her to be in Fallen Angels, which I believe was the title she originally appeared in back in the day in the 80s, the original Fallen Angel miniseries. And, even her character in this issue of New Mutants is saying things like, hey, Armor, you got any adventure? Is there anything going on out there? Any sort of anti-mutant death cults? I'm looking for something to do. That's basically what the character is saying. It's like, hey, if you wanted that, you're in the wrong title. You should have been in Fallen Angels. So let's move on to that issue this week, Fallen Angels number 3. I won't say the weakest of the 3. It might, there's still good things here. I think it's got the absolute best covers still. The Ashley Witterstatter covers on Fallen Angels 2 and 3 are beyond excellent. They're wonderful covers. The art inside, I'm liking to a degree Simon Kudronsky's work here, but there are negative reviews of this out there. There are people, again, who are not really into artists that use 3D models and Poser or other software programs and then draw over those for the finished art. I think it's certainly a valid way of doing the work, but it does lead to some loss of the dynamic nature of the poses, especially in the fight scenes, and that's a little more noticeable in an issue where more than half the issue is a fight scene. Although on the whole, it's a fairly exciting fight scene. It's Psylocke, it's X-23, and it's Nathan Summers. It's not Boom Boom, it's not Boomer, but it's just those first 3. They're going up against this, again, like I said last time, this sort of War of the Worlds on stilts robot, and they take it out, but they lose a guy. Nathan, pictured here, Cable pictured above, gets, I believe, kidnapped, and the cliffhanger here is that we see, I think, it's not clear, but I think we're seeing for the first time Apoth, the villain that they've been after, the villain that's been sending out this overclock drug, this bad drug, not to be confused with the good drugs that Krakoa is sending out. And again, another brief thing in New Mutants is that they're helping, I forget if it's Beak or Angel's father, help him get over it's called the Taylor Ellis disease, and they brought the good drugs from Krakoa to help bring him back to normal. And that worked. But again, in Fallen Angels, we got the bad drugs. We got overclock. If you take that, you're going to have a bad time, essentially. So again, final page here, cliffhanger. Looks like Apoth. What does Apoth look like? Looks kind of like the Dark Priest Shaft from the Castlevania series, but with more spring rocket guns sort of coming out of the back. So like sort of skeleton robot in a purple cloak floating with the giant claw hands, and again, those spring gun things coming out of the back. Interesting design. Where are we going next from here? You won't have to wait long to find out. Same with New Mutants. The new issue of this is coming out next week. The week before Christmas is going to be absolutely flooded with mutant titles. They've been at 3 a week for a bit. They're going to be at 5 a week next week. It's going to be Excalibur, Marauders, all the stuff that came out this week, including the title we haven't talked about yet, X-Force, but not the main X-Men title. It's not going to come out again, I believe, until January. But the last book we got to talk about is X-Force, and surprise, surprise, Charles Xavier, Professor X, is back from the dead. It took an issue longer than I thought it would, but he's back, and just in time, because the humans outside the Krakoan gates in places like New York were asking a lot of questions like, hey, we read the first issue of X-Force, and it seems like Professor X is dead. Can you comment on this situation? And it's basically Professor X walks out just in time. He's like, why don't you ask me yourself? Oh, turns out I'm very much alive. But we know he was dead just briefly. He came back, and Magneto gives him as a token. We don't see this as a scene in the book. It's in one of the text pages. Magneto gives him as a token of that time he got killed by some knockoff Reavers. He gives him a sword forged from the smashed helmet of Cerebro. And it's funny, again, it's like we're kind of mixing metaphors between titles, because there's this token forged sword here in X-Force, but again in Fallen Angels is where all the interesting philosophy about forging a sword appears. And again, that's my favorite bit so far about Fallen Angels. Some of it's kind of dark, but the philosophy there in the text pages and in some of the captions I think is interesting, to say the least. It's not necessarily the most unique philosophy in the world, but it's definitely, from the point of view of a villain, interesting. So that's the books for this week. We had New Mutants, we had X-Force, we had Fallen Angels, something cool, something interesting in all of them. Again, I think the absolute most interesting, you could tell I talked the most about it, was New Mutants number 3. I thought that was a lot of fun, and it made me a fan of Glob. So don't be surprised to see me doing some more art videos with Glob in the near future, because I have been sketching him out for the first time ever. It's just, he's a fun character to draw too, although, you know, you gotta know a bit about anatomy. You have to know at least a bit about the skeleton, because you gotta draw that inside the Glob. But what was I drawing this week? Like I already briefly pointed out, drawing a version of Teen Cable taken from the cover of one of these Fallen Angels books by Pepe Larraz. So I was working on that with previous illustration I did of X-23. So finishing up this page of X-Men fan art. And that'll do it for this week. If you liked the review, like I always ask, please go ahead, smash that like button, or just tap it gently. It's the same effect. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. And if you're an artist yourself, remember, you gotta keep drawing if you want to get better. So until next time, everybody, keep reading and keep drawing.